in Bhakti. And I'll speak this using this particular verse from the Bhagavad Gita 6.5. I'll explain the verse, and then we'll just recite it once or twice. So, Uddhared. Uddhared means to elevate. Atmana Atmanam. So, the word Atma has many different meanings, and accordingly, this verse can be translated in different ways. But for our purposes, let's consider this Atma to be literal self. So, elevate the self with the self. Uddhared Atmanatmanam. So, elevate the self with the self. Na Atmanam avasadayet. That avasadayet is degrade. Don't degrade the self with the self. Atmaiva ya atmano bandhur. That the self can be the friend of the self. Bandhur. And Atmaiva ripur atmanaha. Ripu is the enemy. The self can also be the enemy of the self. So, it is one of the more enigmatic verses of the Gita. And let's try to depict this to understand this better. Is this black color visible or it's visible to everyone? I'll be writing in white. So basically, it's almost as if Krishna is saying that there are two selves inside us. And the relationship between these two selves should be such that we become elevated. So, this is what he recommends. This is 6.5a. If you consider the verse as 4 lines. So, this is A. This is degrade. And Krishna says, this don't do it. This is 6.5b. And then Krishna is saying, this particular self, the self can be our friend. That it is a friend, it helps us in the elevation. That is the C part. And it can be the enemy also. So it can act both ways. So now, what does he mean by this? Now, it's very helpful to understand this verse in terms of our relationship with ourselves. We often talk of having a healthy relationship with others. But what about a healthy relationship with ourselves? Now, if you consider what is the characteristic of a healthy relationship? If you have a healthy relationship with someone, what do you think would be the characteristics of a healthy relationship? Yes?
Trust.
Trust. Okay.
Positivity.
Okay, let's go one by one. Trust means both the people trust each other. Okay. Positivity. That means you feel positive energy in the other person's presence. Okay. Anything else?
Honesty.
Sorry, compassion. That when the other person has some struggles, we want to, there should be help. Honesty, yeah. So I think trust and honesty are related. That, sorry?
Communication.
Communication, that's important. I think there's an American comedian, I think, Woody Allen or someone, he said that my wife and I, we eat at different kitchens, we come and go out of the house from different rooms, we watch different TVs, we drive different cars, we live in different rooms. We are doing everything possible to keep our marriage together. So if the way to preserve a relationship is to make the communication zero, that's already the relationship is in ruins to a large extent. Yes. Anything else?
Compromise.
Compromise. Okay. Just the word compromise slightly has a negative connotation sometimes. But let's put it negotiation. Negotiation will lead to some compromise, adjustment. But both of us, you need to, yes?
Boundaries?
Boundaries. Okay. We respect each other's boundaries. Yes, Prabhu?
We should see value in each other.
Yes. You can say appreciation of each other. If we don't appreciate, we don't value each other, then that's a sign that the relationship is in a bad shape.
What about love?
Sorry?
Love.
Love, okay, that's, you could say, essential. But what happens is love can be a very vague word at times. It's a very important emotion, but it can become very vague. So I think all the other attributes, they contribute.
Upliftment.
Upliftment, okay.
Freedom.
Sorry? Freedom. Can you explain?
We're giving each other the freedom to be who you are. No control. Like not trying to control each other.
That acceptance.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a better word for it.
Yeah. Free acceptance, autonomy, freedom. Yeah. I would say any kind of love, any kind of relationship does bring a certain restriction on freedom, because there's no such thing as, you can say, free love, because love involves forming a bond, and while the bond connects, the bond will also restrict. So there definitely, if we are in a relationship with someone and we just do whatever we like without even thinking about the other person, considering the other person, then there won't be much of a relationship. So in that sense, if we want a relationship, we do have to give up some amount of freedom, but it shouldn't be too suffocating. So we could say that, broadly speaking, thank you. Are there any other major points anybody has to say? So now if we look at this, and what if we apply this to ourselves? How do I look at myself? And the way I look at myself, what is the effect of that on me? Overall, if we consider, when Srila Prabhupada started the Krishna consciousness movement, he said one of the purposes is to bring people closer to each other and closer to Krishna, the prime entity. So the idea is, if we could consider, say, here there is Krishna. I can't draw Krishna, so I'm just making a circle over here. So the idea is, we have a relationship with Krishna, the other person has a relationship with Krishna, and we have a relationship with each other. So the ideal situation is that what will happen as the relationship grows is that from here, say, we come closer to the other person and we all come closer to Krishna also. So this is a healthy result of a relationship. So in one sense, what the relationship does is that both individuals are elevated, while both also become bonded to each other. So both need to get elevated. That's a healthy relationship. So now if we apply this to our relationship with ourselves. Earlier I put the two components of us on an equal pedestal. But let's put it slightly differently now. Say we have a higher self, which we could say that is the far-sighted self, the part of us which thinks long term. In the Vedic tradition, this is associated with the part of us which wants Shreyas, which wants long term good. And then there is the lower self, which is short-sighted, which looks for prayers. The word prayers means just being short-sighted, impulsive. So we all have these two parts within us, and the self is a combination of this. So for example, in the relationship, when there is some tension with other person, one part of us may want to just win the argument right then. We may yell at the other person, we may assert or abuse some power in some way and just get the person to comply. We may get the power at that particular moment, but we may undermine the relationship. So there is a lower self and there is a higher self within us. Now when Krishna says Uddharet Atmanatmanam, so elevate yourself with yourself. What this means, and healthy growth would be that both parts of us get elevated. The higher self goes upward and the lower self also goes upward. This is healthy spiritual growth, healthy growth in bhakti. But what is an unhealthy growth is where the higher self goes up but the lower self goes down. And when there is a lot of increased inner tension, that means there is a part of me which is very kind, which is very gentle, which is very polite, and that is the higher self. But I have anger issues, I have resentment issues. There is a wicked, vicious streak within me, and that has not gone away. That has just been buried underground. So when this tension becomes unbearable, that's when breakdown occurs. So sometimes, because we want to grow spiritually, we try to be our best self, and that is desirable. It's always better to be non-impulsive. It is better to be polite. But if that is at the cost of our lower self being denied and buried, then it is not that burial is going to kill it. It's there, and when it starts surfacing, then we become so alarmed. Either we don't want others to know about it, or we don't want to even acknowledge that this part is there within me. And then we push it down even more forcefully. So then it goes down again, but then it comes back up again. So this involves either suppression or repression. So suppression is where we hide from others. Repression, whereas we deny from even ourselves. That means I don't even acknowledge that I have this issue. So both of these create eventually a serious tension within us. And this sort of growth can seem very impressive. But the problem is that it can be like a comet. It can be like a rocket. It just goes up, and then when it runs out of fuel, it just falls back again. So this sort of growth is like a elastic rubber band. It's like you can pull it to a certain extent. But eventually, either it's going to break or it's going to snap back. So this kind of growth Krishna is not recommending. That's why I say elevate yourself with yourself. It is not just elevate one part of the self. Elevate the full self. So when we are talking about introspection, that is our topic today. So introspection is to understand both these aspects of ourselves and to make sure that both are elevated. So before I was introduced to Bhakti, I had a very short temper. And I used to just get so angry. And I am a lover of words since my childhood. So I'm quite articulate. But actually I realized soon, being articulate and being short-tempered is a deadly combination. Because some people, when they get angry, they just start yelling, they become incoherent, just screaming. But if somebody is articulate and short-tempered, they can really viciously cut the other person by their words. So sometimes a blessing can become a curse. And so, as Krishna says in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that Chato Naishkritiko Lasa, that some people consider it a sign of their cleverness how sharply they can cut the other person down. Now, sarcasm has its use in humor sometimes, but sarcasm in close relationships is not helpful at all. So, as I started practicing bhakti, I was amazed how much my anger decreased. But generally, when we start practicing bhakti, the first 2, 3, or first 5 years, I like to call the honeymoon phase of bhakti. Where everything is so wonderful. And we feel, okay, my lower side has disappeared. But after maybe 3, 4, 5 years, we find, hey, that's the lower side is still there. It is resurfacing again. We start thinking, is the bhakti not working? Or what is happening? It's not that bhakti is not working, but quite often in the first few years, we are mostly doing this, expanding our inner. Not expanding in the sense as stretching ourselves. So one part of us is going up very fast, and some part of it does, the lower part, some part of the lower part does disappear. But some part just gets buried, gets denied. So after around 4 or 5 years, I started finding that I would just get annoyed over trivial things. And I would not raise my voice. I would definitely not use, not show much visible signs of anger. But it was just, the annoyance would come just for a few moments. But in those few moments, I would again speak such words that would really hurt the other person. And sometimes I wouldn't even realize I was doing this because it was just a blip that would come and go. Previously, the anger was not just a blip. The anger was like a tidal wave. But whatever it was, it is still there. And after some time, some of my close friends are telling me. And my first response was denial. But then when 1, 2, 3, 4 friends started telling me, then I started taking it a bit seriously. So that's when actually I started becoming introspective. I was always analytical. But you could say at that time my analysis was more in the philosophy, in presenting the philosophy. And of course practicing the philosophy, but it was more practicing in terms of how can I chant better, how can I be more aware when I'm doing my devotional activities. But it was not so much analyzing my inner world. So that's when I found that these traces were still there and they would keep surfacing. So the vision of growth for us in spiritual life, it's good that our higher self is going up. But along with that, the lower self. There will always be the lower self, and there will be some tension between the higher self and the lower self. The ideal situation is the lower self also rises up. So to give another example of what it means is, see, we all may get angry. And there are times when anger is also a valid response. Of course, the action that we do when we get angry, that may not be always the best thing to do. But there are many things wrong in the world. And say if a small child is being bullied and we are passing by, and if we don't feel anything when that small child is being bullied, then there's something wrong with us. We should feel some anger, some concern, some outrage. Now that doesn't mean we directly go and confront the bully or try to beat up the bully. We have to figure out what we should do. But the emotion of anger itself is not a bad thing. However, when we get angry, whether it is for a valid reason or invalid reason. That means it's just we have control issues, our ego has been triggered by someone, or there is some outrageous thing happening out there. Whatever be the cause of the anger, how do we express it? So when I say the lower self also rises up, what that would mean is, say, if in the past when we would get angry, maybe we would use foul words, maybe we would utter obscenities, maybe we would become physically abusive, hit someone with something. So if our lower self is also getting elevated, that means even when we get angry now, we may still get angry because the lower self is still there, but then there will be boundaries. Okay, I may get angry, I may raise my voice, but I'm not going to use obscene language. I'm not going to speak profanities. And certainly I'm not going to become physically abusive. So that's an indication that the whole self is getting elevated. So even our lower self, when it manifests, it is not as bad as the way the lower self was manifesting previously. But if we don't let that lower self get some expression, then what happens is that lower self seeks some expression somewhere else. And I see this very prominently in the devotee community in terms of hierarchies. What do I mean by hierarchies? There are many devotees, and often sincere devotees, you could say. They are so humble and polite and submissive with their seniors, but they are just brutal with their juniors. It's almost like Dr. Jekyll has turned into Mr. Hyde. And it just takes a few moments. I may say that, okay, it's my responsibility to correct the other person, it's my responsibility to be polite and submissive to my seniors. That is true. But seniors and juniors, they're all parts of Krishna. And so what is happening is the higher self is coming out with our seniors, but the lower self is sometimes coming out with our juniors. So that lower self also needs to be addressed properly. So that's what we will be talking about when we're talking about introspection today. The purpose of introspection is to ensure that the lower self is also elevated. It is not suffocated. So recently I've started writing some poetry as prayers to Krishna. So this is a theme which we'll be trying to discuss today. O Lord, grant me the unflinching eye to see the unvarnished eye. Not just the self I want to see, but also the self I need to see. O Lord, you appreciate the best of me, yet you accept all of me. Guide me to accommodate the worst of me, so I can let you elevate all of me. So there are two parts to this. First part is more of just introspection. The second part is more of bhakti. It will come in the one screen. So grant me the unflinching eye. So eye is the vision and eye is also the self. So generally when there is something that we don't want to look at, we just turn our eye away from that. Our eye flinches, our eye wavers. So grant me the unflinching eye, so I can see the unvarnished eye. There is a certain amount of varnishing, decorating of ourselves that we do. The unvarnished eye. So that means, what is the varnishing trying to cover? It is the eye that I want to see. Oh, I'm so sweet, I'm so nice, I'm so polite. But there are these mean streaks within me. That's what I don't want to see. So, Lord, grant me the unflinching eye so that I can see all of me. Now, when we start seeing this dark part within us, it can make us very insecure. It can make us question the very foundation of our being. But For us, security can come from knowing that Krishna accepts all of us. Just like in a relationship, every person has a better side and a higher self and lower self. So we naturally like the higher self of the other person, but we accept the lower self of the other person also. And Krishna is the ultimate exemplar of this. So, oh Lord, you appreciate the best of me, yet you accept all of me. So, Krishna doesn't want that we deny and suppress our lower self. Of course, he doesn't want that we just let our lower self have a free reign and degrade us or hurt others. But Krishna accepts all of us. And similarly, if we understand this, that Krishna accepts me, even the darkest part of me, then what does it mean? Then we can pray, guide me to accommodate the worst of me. Why do you use that accommodate? That's not something which we'll love, but we need to accommodate that part so that the Lord can elevate all of me. So accommodate means give a place, give an appropriate place. If we don't accommodate, we can't really expel, because it's a part of the self. All that will happen is we won't expel it, we will just deny it. It's like, say, somebody whom we don't want. Say, if in our house somebody, maybe in traditional societies, they were much more face-saving societies. Face-saving means that we all want to look good before the world. Everybody wants to do that. But say, if in some family there was some child who had some learning deficiencies, some mental health challenges, the child behavior may not be what is normal or standard, then some of the families would want to hide that person. If some guests have come to our house, let that person not come out at all. It's okay, but you can't, the part of the family, you can't drive the person out. Then maybe send that person to the basement, hide them somewhere. Now, that's not a healthy thing to do. Sometimes it may be necessary, but that person is also part of us, part of our family. So we can't expel our lower self. What do is we send the lower self underground. But from underground, that lower self will sabotage us. So we don't want that to happen. So now sometimes the higher self is referred to as the intelligence, the lower self is referred to as the mind. And that usage is fair enough. But to some extent it is a little oversimplified. Because when we equate the lower self with the mind, the problem is that Krishna says the lower self, or whatever is the lower self, he says it can also become our friend. So the mind is the part of us which is more associated with emotions. The intelligence is more associated with reason. Now, is it that all reason is better than all emotion? Not necessarily. Yes, in general, our emotions can make us act in short-term ways. Sometimes our reason can enable us to act in long-term ways. But it's not that our emotions are a bad part of us. Just as emotions can blind us in some ways, even just cold reason can blind us in some ways also. If a person is just too logical, too analytical, then a person may not perceive the human aspect. So that's why the point I'm making is, rather than simply using the word mind and intelligence for these, we just understand that there is a part of us which is lower. So the higher self, it's not exactly the intelligence. The lower self is not exactly the mind. Because why? The intelligence, if we associate with reason, and mind which you associate with emotion, so both have positive and negative associated with it. Now, in the overall balance, we can say the reason side is better than the emotion side, in the sense that our emotions often work against us. But Krishna says, Mai arpita mano buddhir. So he doesn't want us to offer only our intelligence to him. He wants the mind and intelligence both to be offered. So in that sense, we it's a little simplistic to say the lower self is only associated with emotions or is only the mind. Sometimes some people can use their intelligence to come up with deceptive reasoning. There is this word rationalize. Rationalize, what does it mean? What does rationalize mean?
Yeah, to basically say, to give a reason as to why it's acceptable.
Okay, to give a reason.
Justification.
Justification. Yeah, it's like to give a more acceptable reason for a less acceptable action. It's basically, say, if a husband has told his wife, I'll stop smoking, and the wife suddenly comes into the study room or workroom, office space of the husband, and says, smoke over there. He says, why are you smoking? Oh, I was not smoking. Actually, the atmosphere was so cold, I wanted to warm it for you. So, when we rationalize, what happens is we tell rational lies. So, we use our rational faculty to come up with lies. So, now this is coming from the intelligence, not the mind. Because the intelligence has to think this up. So there is a higher self and a lower self, and we want to elevate both of them. Yeah, sorry.
The top one where you said that the higher self is reason and the lower self.
No, I said that's an oversimplification of it. I did, yeah.
Just something that always keeps coming in my mind, especially after joining Krishna consciousness, is that you have to be humble. You have to look humble. You have to say, kind of your softer side has to kind of come out, and that could be fake. Could be, right? Because even if it's reason of higher self, but I believe that the emotional side, which is the lower self, is better because you are yourself. So maybe it's kind of introspection, but I just thought that I'll check with you. What do you think about it?
Yeah, it's a good point. See, humility is a very important spiritual virtue. At the same time, it's very easy for humility to be either misunderstood or it can also be misapplied. Or I could put it, let's put it. Yeah, let's put it another way. I don't know if there's a word like this, but misexplained. Misinterpreted might be a better word.
Misunderstood.
Not exactly. See, I'll tell you the difference between the two of these. That misunderstood means that I understand it wrong. But I'm using misinterpreted in the sense that somebody who is teaching me teaches it wrongly so that they can keep us under their thumb. So that they keep us compliant or pliant or whatever. So both are possible. Now, in my understanding, humility, it has one essential purpose. Ultimately, what is humility meant to do? Humility is meant to take us from self-consciousness to Krishna consciousness. That means we are not constantly thinking of ourselves. Oh, I'm like this, I'm like that, I'm like that. Okay, whatever I am, I'm a part of Krishna, I want to serve Krishna. So this self-consciousness can come in two ways. One could be ego, and quite often we think of ego and humility as opposites. But it's not two things over there, three over there. The opposite of ego is insecurity. And in between is humility. So ego is self-consciousness where I think I am so terrific. I am so great. Insecurity is where I think I'm so terrible, I'm so bad. Hmm? So humility is the mean between the two. So self-consciousness can be both ways, very self-congratulatory and very self-condemnatory. Humility frees us from both. So in philosophical terms, ego is I am everything. I can do everything. Basically, it is I am God. You may not say that. I can do everything. That's the basic idea of ego. Now, insecurity is I can do nothing. If I go further, I am nothing. Humility is I can do some things. Because I am a part of Krishna. So here it's I am nothing, here I am everything. We are not the whole, we are not Krishna. But we are not nothing also. Mamaiv amsho jiva loki. So I am a part. And as a part, I have a part to play. So when we are humble, actually there is authentic self-acceptance. This is what I am. These are my limitations. These are my strengths. This is what I can do. So if in the name of humility, our self-consciousness is increasing more and more, then that is actually not healthy. That is not really humility. So the self-consciousness, for some people it may be more, I am so great, I am so powerful, I am so much to be praised and celebrated. That is one side, which is ego, and that needs to be brought down. But sometimes the pendulum can go to the other extreme, where if in the name of humility, if I'm said, okay, don't express your opinion itself, don't express your emotions, don't speak, basically become nothing. Now, of course, there may be some forums where speaking in some ways may not be acceptable. Every social circle has its own norms. But everybody needs a place where they can be themselves. So humility is basically meant to free us from self-consciousness. Okay. Thank you. Important question. So now, I'll talk about 3 broad principles which we could use to navigate through the inner self. Our inner self can also be considered to be like an ocean. It's complex. We have many conditionings from the past, from this life, from previous lives, and they are there inside. Some of them may be active, some of them may not be so active. So I'll talk about 3 principles. Oar. We can use an oar to navigate the inner ocean. Sometimes introspection can seem overwhelming. Now, what do I introspect about? Is it that sometimes if we start journaling, we write down everything, every single event that happens in our day. We start writing every emotion that we experience. Sometimes most of us may go more in terms of action without introspection. But sometimes if there is too much introspection, that can also lead to paralysis by analysis. Isn't it? So when we are looking at introspection, we try to understand our inner world. So the first step is observe. So observe means it's almost like, say, we take some time every day to look at ourselves from a perspective about ourselves. That means maybe at the end of the day, I look back and say, okay, how did I respond to situations today? How did I act in today's situations? Were there some times when my lower self surfaced? And we don't just want to harp on our lower self. We can also highlight and appreciate our higher self. no, this time this person spoke like this, I could have yelled at that person, but I did not. So basically, when we observe, what are we trying to observe? Both our higher self and the lower self. We have to observe. Basically, we can look back at a day. If we look back at the end of the day, what was the best thing that I did today? What was the thing that, say, if I had a mentor, if I had a guide, I would feel happy to report to them? What was the thing that I did? And similarly, what was the thing that I feel embarrassed about, I feel ashamed about? I wince or I regret that I acted in that particular way. Now, when we are observing, in one sense, we are judging. But at this stage, the first is simply observe. Now, just this, even if we take a few minutes every day to observe, it's helpful. And I have found that if I spend this time, at the end of the day, we are all tired, we just want to get the day over with and rest. But if we make some time, I find the next day, I'm able to focus more in my chanting. Because if there are all those unprocessed emotions from the previous day, then they cause distraction on the next day during our meditation time. Now, processing the emotions may not happen just by a few minutes of introspection. But at least, okay, I recognize this issue needs to be dealt with. So there is a certain level of pacification that comes. So observe the lower self and the higher self. Then A is analyze. Analyze means just go beyond the actions. So analyze is basically why. Now why? I prefer two parts. Now this is when I'm saying or, this is just simply one tool for doing introspection. There are many different ways in which introspection can be done. But this is just one way we can begin the journey. So why? First the emotion itself. Now when I say the emotion, okay, why do I feel that this is something? Why do I feel good about this action that I did? Why do I feel bad about this particular action? So we are trying to understand our own values. At the end of a day, okay, if this is what I feel, in a healthy sense, I feel proud of. In the sense that, okay, I maintained my cool when this person was behaving like this. So if that's what we feel happy about, then that we want to understand our own values also. Why is this so important for me? So we try to understand the emotion. And then we try to understand the action itself. Okay, if I did something good, how was I able to do it? What gave me the strength? And similarly, if I did something bad, okay, what provoked me to do it? What triggered me? What was going on before that? What was going on after that? So we analyze. And sometimes this analysis may require time and we may not be able to analyze everything. But if we observe a pattern, okay, this thing seems to be happening repeatedly. If we just introspect for a few days, in some days of introspection, we might just be able to observe. We might not have the time to analyze. That's okay. Start somewhere. And the last part is regulate. So, okay, regulate means that if my lower self is surfacing in particular ways, how can I regulate it? What could I do to prevent this from happening? What could I do to stop myself from, if it happens, that I don't go so far? In self-transformation, it's not a 1-0. That one day I get angry, the next day I don't get angry at all. Maybe I get angry, but I am able to get a handle on myself, on my temper faster. Instead of going on a rant for 10 minutes, I speak for 2 minutes and then I pull myself back. So that's regulation. Now, regulation can be helped by external and internal change. So I'll conclude with this part. In the Ramayana, when Hanuman goes to Lanka, he faces many obstacles. And each of these obstacles have been explained by the acharyas as representing certain things. And we can also look at the context and try to understand in terms of our inner journey, our inner growth. So the last two obstacles, I'll focus on the last two. When Hanuman went from the Indian coast to Lanka, does anyone remember the four obstacles that he faced? Mainaka was the mountain that he faced first. Second was, there was a goddess in the form of a demoness. She was Surasa. The third was an actual demoness. Her name was Simhika. And the last was the guardian deity of Lanka. Her name was Lankini. Now, when Hanuman, let's look at Lankini and Simhika, we'll focus on that. When Hanuman faced Lankini, she blocked his way. And he said, no one can enter Lanka as long as I am guarding it. And Hanuman just very nonchalantly just slapped her. And his purpose was not to injure her, just hit her and she fell off. She fell on the side and his Hanuman went ahead. So now this represents basically our superficial attachments. We all have certain attachments where we succumb when there are some external provocations. So if we just remove those external provocations and then that issue is over. Like they say, out of sight is out of mind. And it is true to many extent. Say, if some people say are social drinkers, they drink because they go to a party and everyone else is drinking. Now if they make a plan, I won't go to such a party, or they make a plan that I'll have something alternative to drink, and they can get away with that, then the pressure is not there. They make the external change and it's over. It's no big trouble. So if somebody finds that they spend too much time on maybe watching TV or surfing on the net, okay, when I'm going to study, I'm not going to have the TV in the same room, I'm not going to have my phone next to me. Just make some external change and remove that particular source of provocation and the issue is addressed. Now this is possible and this step shouldn't be devalued. So in many situations, the best way to deal with temptation is to not have to deal with temptation. This is the principle that Krishna talks about in 2.58, where he says that a tortoise withdraws its limbs. So the idea is that just get ourselves out of temptation zone. Just create a safe zone for ourselves. So now this is desirable when the attachment is superficial. See, out of sight is out of mind. That is true, but there's another saying also. See, traditional wisdom often has opposite statements. So one is out of sight is out of mind. The other is separation makes the heart grow fonder. So sometimes what is out of sight goes more in the mind, or it surges up in the mind actually. Why? Because if there is already the attachment there, then at that time, out of sight, it doesn't work. So basically, we could say when there are temptations, there are distractions. I'll use temptations as an example. Provocations also same thing. One is where the objects come towards us. So if that is happening, then we just create some boundaries, the objects don't come towards us. But there are cases when the attachment is so much that we go toward the objects. Isn't it? So in that case, even if something is out of sight, what will happen is we will bring it in sight because it's already playing and replaying in our mind. So now this particular thing is the obstacle that is represented by Simhika. Now, what happens with Simhika? Hanuman is just racing across the ocean through the sky. Some people say he flew across the ocean. It was not a flight, actually, it was a leap. He took a mighty leap, and the momentum of that leap took him across the ocean. So he was racing across, and suddenly he found himself immobilized. He was exerting himself, and he just couldn't know what happened. He looked around, he couldn't see anything. And that's when he looked down. There's nothing. And he saw there was this demoness was looking up at him with a vicious, mocking grin on her face. And Hanuman immediately realized this demoness has some mystic power by which she has immobilized him. Now, he had already exerted himself. He tried once again to break through that spell. But he just couldn't. And he realized this demoness wants to devour me. So he preempted her. She was going to drag him inside. Now, she could sense that Hanuman was a powerful being. And she expected a struggle. She saw how forcefully Hanuman was trying to break through her mystical spell. So Hanuman suddenly raced down and he caught her by surprise. He raced down right through her mouth. Before she could bite him or chew him or injure him with her teeth, Hanuman sped down through her mouth into her belly. And then from within, he attacked and he tore apart her stomach. And he just leapt up, crying out, Jai Shri Ram. And this demoness fell back. She was shocked and stunned and she was defeated. So this Simhika represents deep-rooted attachments. So for deep-rooted attachments, we just can't hit one blow and get them out. So when there is an unhealthy craving within us, when there's anger, when there is greed, when there is any kind of addictive craving, so we may need to go deeper inwards. See, every unhealthy craving is basically a distorted expression of some healthy need. So, what do I mean by that? Whatever it is that we do again and again and again. And sometimes say, I just have no willpower, I have no self-control, I keep doing this again. No, that's not very helpful to simply think in those terms. See, a superficial question is, why do I do this? It's an important question, but this can be a very judgmental question. I'm such a fool to do this. I'm such a terrible person to do this. But a way to go inward is, what does this do for me? What does this do for me? Suppose, say, somebody spends a lot of time on social media. Somebody spends a lot of time watching TV. Okay, why do I do this? I resolve I'm not going to do this and I spend so much time, I waste so much time. Okay, what does this do for me? Yeah, maybe I just feel bored. and this is a way to dissipate the boredom. Maybe I just feel empty and this is just a way to fill the vacuum in me, whatever it is. So we need to go deeper to find out what need is being addressed. Now, if we are feeling bored, that's a valid concern. Nobody wants to feel bored in life. Now we may need to find out what is a healthier way for me to address this boredom. And if we can find that, maybe if at that time when I'm feeling bored, if I say, okay, hear a lecture, that's too much, I can't do that, I'm already, if I read some book, that's too much. Maybe I can hear some music at that time. Maybe I can do some exercise, some light exercise. So we can try to find out a healthier way to address that need. So the unhealthy craving, it might lead to some indulgence. But we are indulging not because we find that particular activity so enjoyable, but rather we are just bored. We are feeling unstimulated. We just need some stimulation in life. Now, if we can find healthy means to address that need, then we'll find that is a much more sustainable way to deal with that problem. Now, I'll conclude with one last point. At the ultimate level, the healthy means to fulfilling that particular need. The ultimate healthy fulfillment is Krishna. When we are able to connect ourselves with Krishna, when we become absorbed in Krishna, at that time, all our unhealthy cravings will go away. At the same time, for us to get to that level of absorption may take some time. And during that intermediate time, we may need to find out some ways which may be somewhat connected with Krishna, which may even be in Sattva Guna, but which address that need in a healthier way. And this is introspection. This is where introspection can play a key role. What do I mean by this healthy means for fulfilling that to fulfillment? See, there are activities for us which are uplifting, and there are activities which are relaxing for us. Krishna says, Yukta ahara viharasya. Krishna says we also need some relaxation, we also need some recreation. That's a valid need. So now for some people, so uplifting means we could say what is good for us. Relaxing is what feels good for us. So now for some people, maybe just hearing classes is not just uplifting, it's also relaxing. Maybe classes which are nice katha, this kind of class is not relaxing for most people. It is demanding what we are discussing. But some people, this is what they find relaxing. For some people, devotional activities may be both uplifting and relaxing. For some people, okay, I just pick a harmonium and start singing. For some people, okay, I just sit and start making garlands for the Lord. I just feel so peaceful by that. So now, what may happen is somebody who finds the relaxing activity within a direct expression of bhakti. That person, we could say, in some ways is fortunate. But some devotees, if say it's Ekadashi, I'll chant 64 rounds. And after 64 rounds, they feel so rejuvenated, so energized. Some other devotee, 64 rounds, just the thought of that starts giving them, oh my God. It requires far more strength to chant 64 rounds than the strength we get from it. Now, it's not necessarily an indication of a fallen state. Okay, we are all fallen in this world. But the point is, just because somebody can chant 64 rounds doesn't necessarily mean that anybody who can't chant 64 rounds is not a good devotee. For them, that is uplifting and rejuvenating, it's relaxing and rejuvenating. For somebody else, it might be something else. So if we find out a healthy way for ourselves, this intersection, so we all have to do things which are uplifting even when they're not relaxing. That's a part of our sadhana. But we also need to do something which just, I feel so relaxed and comfortable doing it. So now, if we start doing relaxing activities and not uplifting, then we'll have to see how far that goes. They may also be degrading. So we don't want to go in that direction as much as possible. But if you can find something relaxing, so this is a way to, it is that healthy means to address that need. When we do that through introspection, then we'll find that the craving will be addressed much more. This is param drishtva nivartate. This is how we become settled gradually in the higher taste. So this regulation, which I'm talking about, is not just a matter of willpower. It is more a matter of redirection, addressing that need in a healthier way. And in my understanding, this is the toughest part of introspection. Regulation is not control, it is redirection. So the first part of observation is not that difficult. Even analyzing is a little more difficult. But finding out regulation, how do I regulate? Do I just get this out of my mind, out of sight? Or is this I have to go and I get some insight about why am I doing this? And then find out. So here it is out of sight. Here we need not out of sight, we need insight. We need to go within. And this requires effort. But we'll find that this kind of introspection can be remarkably transformative and empowering. So I'll summarize what we discussed today. Our topic was broadly introspection in Bhakti. And we started 6.5 in the Bhagavad Gita about how we want a healthy relationship with ourselves. So a healthy relationship with another person would mean that the two people come closer to each other and they come closer to Krishna also. This is healthy relationship. So similarly for us, a healthy relationship with ourselves, we discussed was that there are these two parts of us. There is a higher self and there is a lower self within us. What we want is both of these get elevated, the higher self and the lower self. This is what we want. What we don't want is the higher self goes up and the lower self goes down. When this happens, then this is going to lead to a breakdown eventually. So then, in the second part, I discussed primarily about when we are trying to do introspection. So if we are doing this particular aspect, this will eventually be, we discuss how the higher self, and higher self is not the same as intelligence. The lower self is not simply the same as the mind, because ultimately Krishna wants to be offered both our intelligence, our reasoning faculty, and our mind, our emotion faculty. Krishna want to offer both to him. So rather than simply labeling one side negatively, simplistically, we understand both need to be accommodated. And then how do we elevate? We discuss the acronym OR. O was what? Observe. So if you consider the OR for navigating our inner ocean. So we observe. What do we observe? Ourself, our higher self and our lower self. So the things we feel happy about, we feel proud doing, and we feel ashamed doing. And we look at, when we observe, A was analyze. So we analyze two things. The emotion, okay, why do I feel proud of this? Why do I feel ashamed of this? And then we analyze the action also. Okay, what exactly was the background when I did this? We try to evaluate. So by this emotion, we understand the values. What are the values driving us? When we analyze the action, we try to understand our behavioral pattern. In which situations do I do this? And then R was? So regulate. Regulate could just at one level mean avoid. We discussed the example of Lankini. Just get it out of the way. Create a safe zone. But the other is we have to redirect. So redirect, here the example of Simhika. So we need to go inwards to find out when there is an unhealthy craving. How can I get down to the healthy need that is there? What is the natural healthy need, and how can there really healthy means to fulfill that need? So this is where it's not going out of sight, but it is gaining, not putting out of sight, but gaining insight that will help us. And through it all, this lower side, this dark side, we don't want to deny it or reject it. We don't want to hide it. Denying is repression, hiding is suppression. We don't want to do either of these. Understand that Krishna accepts all of us. So we don't have to be insecure. We can be open, we can be curious and explore our inner self, so that we can offer our entire self to Krishna eventually. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much, Baruch. Just a couple of points. First point is, can you just cancel all your plans in the UK and just stay here? Who's up for that?
May I ask something?
Yes, please.
You said
Do you want to ask something?
I have said
Yeah.
Yes, let me complete.
Yeah, just a quick question.
One
So
minute.
we hear about this phenomenon in the West of dark night of the soul. So obviously in Bhakti we hear Krishna saying about Apijit Sudarachara, so it encourages us in the sense that Prabhupada mentions that due to the power of material nature, sometimes it will be the case that we may make mistakes and so on. But is there such a phenomenon similar to how we hear about dark night of the soul, where there is a significant moment in our life where we may go through some type of adversity, where we're overcome by our lower nature?
Is there something like the dark night of the soul? Well, in the experience of seekers, it's definitely there. But in the mention in the scripture or the tradition specifically, I haven't come across anything explicitly stated. Now we could say for the gopis, when they went to be with Krishna after he called them by playing the flute song, and then Krishna left them and went away. That was like a dark night for their souls. It seems that they were abandoned by Krishna. So basically that is an example. This is a very different context. The gopis, we understand, are pure devotees. And dark night of the soul is not just a person no longer experiences Krishna, but often a person may even start doubting the existence of Krishna. The gopis are annoyed with Krishna. The gopis are angry with Krishna also to some extent. But the gopis don't go to that particular level of doubting the existence of Krishna. So basically, Arjuna's situation is what I find the closest. When Arjuna finds out that Krishna has departed, and then he finds that he cannot even protect Krishna's queens. So basically, the dark night of the soul, there are many different understandings of this, but there are dark times for the soul. First, when our material strengths, or we could say even our material shelters, they go away or they are taken away. But what is worse is even our spiritual strengths, even our spiritual shelters seem to go away. That means, say we face some financial crisis, face some health crisis, and that time when we start trying to chant, we just don't feel any connection with Krishna. That that is a devastating double attack. So for Arjuna, first he lost Krishna. And then he lost his archery ability also. So materially and spiritually, both ways. Of course, we can say Arjuna is pure devotee, so everything is spiritual. But once we start going to the level of pure devotee, then there's nothing for us as sadhakas to learn. If we take from operational perspective, he lost. Generally, we want means for living and we want meaning for living. So for Arjuna, his archery was the means for living. For him, Krishna was the meaning of his life. So Krishna had gone and his archery skills were also. We can't even imagine how utterly crushing it would be. Somebody is a singer and they sing for the pleasure of their spiritual master or something like that, and then spiritual master departs from the world. And suddenly they get some kind of throat cancer, they lose their singing ability also. What am I meant to do? It would be utterly devastating. Now to say that Arjuna's archery skill was simply material is oversimplification. He was using it for a spiritual purpose. So at that time, what did he do? That was the time when he found shelter in Krishna. And he found shelter specifically in Krishna's words in the Gita. But the phase before that, before he found that, when Yudhishthira says, I have never seen Arjuna in such a discombobulated state, such a utterly devastated state, what's happened to you? So that is what I would say is something like the dark night of the soul. Those terms may not be used, but that state is very much there. Thank you. That's true.
Is that higher self and lower self, is it sattva gun and tamo guni?
Can the higher self and the lower self be compared to the modes? Well, possibly. I would hesitate to do that because the modes are influences on us. They are not parts of us. Like the modes, so the tamogun may activate the lower self. The sattvagun may activate the higher self. But the modes exist, the standard metaphor is ropes. They exist in the material world independent of the self. And they act on the self. So they are associated definitely. Sattva-guna is associated with the higher self. Tamo-guna will be associated with the lower self. But I don't think we can equate the two. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please.
What's the difference between introspection and overthinking?
What's the difference between introspection and overthinking? This question, is this an example of introspection or overthinking?
How do you figure that one out?
Okay. So generally speaking, my understanding is introspection or deep thinking. It is basically directed thinking. It takes us in some direction. Overthinking just keeps going round and round and round and round. It doesn't take us anywhere basically. Sorry. Just keep, either the circles can become bigger, the circles can become slower, but you just keep going round and round. So basically, if we are not getting any clear insight by our thinking, then in general you can say it's overthinking. And I would say that's one characteristic. Another is that in general, to be able to do deep thinking, we need to try to first be in sattva. That means if you want to do some serious introspection, then maybe pray, do some deep breathing, do something which elevates our consciousness, and then try to go into deep thinking. But here it is, we are starting only first in tamas. We are in a lower mode. And while we are in the lower mode, we start thinking. And that time we just don't get anywhere. Just keep going around. Oh, why did I do this? Why did this happen? Why did this person speak like this? And just go round and round and round. So at that time, now there are serious issues to be thought about, but if we are in Tamoguna, we have to decide this is not the time to think about these things. So the same person is capable of both, but where they are at, that's important to understand. So we can look at in one sense when it's a circular, we can look at the result, and then we can look at our state. What is the result of the thinking? What is my state when I'm doing the thinking? And then thirdly, I would say that if sooner or later we need to talk with someone, we need some guidance or at least some discussion. This is where Guhyam Akhyati Pruchyati, that sharing our heart comes up. So then somebody else may help us. Okay, here sometimes just things happen in the world, and there's just no figuring out. This happened like that, and that happened like that happened like that, and sometimes we just can't figure out why things happened. We just have to accept this happened and move on with life. In the Mahabharata, Yudhishthir, when he meets the various sages in the forest, he's trying to make sense of what happened. Both, two things. Something terrible happened to him, and he also did something terrible. He gambled not because he had any craving for money, not because he had any unhealthy habit. He gambled because he just wanted to obey his elders. Yudhishthira and Vidura both, or rather, Dhritarashtra had come and sent the message through Vidura. So, but then somehow he just got swept away, and he couldn't figure out why did this happen to me and why did this happen through me. So there's no Yudhishthira talks with different sages and they give different understandings. But it's just sometimes things you can't figure. We try to understand, but Yudhishthira focuses more on gaining spiritual wisdom rather than necessarily trying to figure out what happened. See, sometimes when we are studying philosophy, we try to study philosophy to understand the problems that we are facing. And that's good. But sometimes we need to look at philosophy and study Shastra to just rise above the problems. Sometimes we reason through the problems, sometimes we rise above the problems. Sometimes we are too problem conscious while studying Shastra or hearing classes. Then anything that doesn't seem to be connected with our problems, we just start switching off from it. So we need to seek guidance from others also. Okay, maybe any of the ladies have any questions?
Here the intersection you showed between uplifting and relaxing. Do you think that when we move into this spiritual journey and bhakti, that intersection expands or it remains the same?
Yes, I would say definitely the intersection would increase, but every individual is different. So I wouldn't say consider the increase in the intersection as the sole or even key characteristic of spiritual advancement. What do I mean by that? That say some people may just love nature and they may find nature very calming. Now if that person starts practicing bhakti, now is it that they may find the same calming effect by coming to the temple and beholding Krishna or chanting Krishna's name? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe if that person is of a more introspective nature, that person is more of an introvert kind of person, then coming to temple definitely is uplifting. But there's so much crowd over there that they don't really feel that level of relaxation in that. So if somebody wants to be with themselves, wants to be close to nature, then now maybe in the past, before they started practicing bhakti, that relaxation that they got was just by beholding the beauty of nature. Now when they go in nature, they may remember Krishna more. They may remember the natural beauty of Krishna, within Krishna's pastimes and Vrindavan and other things. But I would say it's more a matter of a person's attraction to Krishna increasing, a person's remembrance of Krishna increasing. It may not necessarily express itself in particular external ways. Okay? Thank you. Yes. The last question. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay, there are two questions. We'll try to finish one.
So mine would be simple, but for particular situation when we are not feeling good, that impact, like if I try to do japa, I don't feel like doing japa in that case. So how can I overcome on that particular situation? If particular day went bad, it's material or something.
Yeah,
did
it's
not
tough.
go well, that impacts my japa as well. So how can I overcome that?
Yeah. It's sometimes our chanting, it's like an exercise. Sometimes exercise gives strength, sometimes exercise requires strength. So at a basic level, we need to have that level of discipline that, okay, however I feel, I will do this. But at another level, we can't just force ourselves too much. So maybe we find out something else that gives us some strength, that helps us feel more peaceful. Maybe before we start our japa, we may hear some kirtan, we sing along some tunes which we like for a few minutes, get our mind to become a little calmer, let ourselves to feel better. And then we chant. So sometimes our chanting gives rise to positive emotion. Sometimes we may have to bring positive emotion into our chanting. That means get positive emotion from somewhere else and then we bring it into our chanting. Yes, bro. You had a question?
I had a
Yeah,
question.
please. Yeah.
So the question was that I've been sitting here thinking how to frame the question the whole time, but I'll try to do it justice. I know there's already a tradition within our culture that you take Shastra, you take events of Shastra, like you explained this Hanuman taking a leap and going all the way to there, and then you've given descriptions that each stage is like some kind of impediment in our bhakti or in our progression as to Krishna consciousness. But we don't necessarily always find that kind of direct, kind of inner learning of that pastime, always mentioned in scriptures necessarily. But we do have a tradition naturally from spiritual masters where we do, they say don't have chinta, do chintan, have contemplation or mananam on the meaning of a mantra or the meaning of this pastime, for example. Even with deities, we were talking about this yesterday over dinner with some devotees as well, so that's why I was did you have anywhere where they kind of give that inner meaning of that pastime, for example, anywhere? Like in a Tika or some explanation, because I know Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he mentions that each demon that comes to Vrindavan is different, Krodha or Lobha or something like this, right?
Yeah.
So is there something that can help us to validate that these ideas are not just coming from because we thought about it?
So I said two different things, a very, very important question. Bhaktivinoda Thakur does talk about this principle. And he says that there are that the Shastra, the pastimes of the Shastra, they can be seen at the Kanishta level, they can be seen at the Madhyama level, and they can be seen at the Uttama level. Now, he's not using Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama in the same sense in which, say, the nectar of instruction is using it. So he says the Kanishtas see everything at the literal level. They're just interested in the stories. The Madhyamas, they look at the non-literal level. They look for some deeper meanings. I wouldn't necessarily want to use the inner meaning. It's a deeper meaning. So they look for deeper meanings. And he appreciates. Yes, they are more thoughtful, they are more introspective. So the Kanishtas can get caught in just the externals. For them, these are just stories, entertaining stories. He appreciates the Madhyama in that for their analysis, but then he says that there is a Uttama level where they appreciate this at a transcendental level. Where for them, these are not just stories, these are revelations of the ultimate reality. For them, this is Krishna manifesting. Now, at the Kanishta level, people are only interested in entertainment. And that's why they want new stories all the time. Like we say nectar hunt, nectar shopping, as we say. And if something is about not Krishna but something else also, it's entertaining, they will start getting caught in that also. But the Uttama, they are interested in Krishna only. And they can also give non-literal meanings, but that's not what their primary interest is. So based on this, I use an acronym. This LEAD. We need to lead people to Krishna through these pastimes. So L is the literal level, E is the ethical level, A is the allegorical level, and D is the devotional level. So now, in Chaitanya Shikshamrita and Krishna Samhita, where Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives these non-literal meanings, he really doesn't give much explanation of the correlation. Say Putana represents false guru. Now, why exactly Putana represents false guru? Why does Shaktasur represent this? Why does this particular demon represent that? It's just a one sentence correlation that he gives. So my understanding of why he does this is basically he is showing us that there is room for intellectual accommodation. Just think, with the mind where there are desires, with the intelligence there are doubts, there are questions. Now, within the path of bhakti, desires can be accommodated. That there is space. If somebody cannot be a pure devotee, then they can have material things, but they can still practice bhakti. So people can have some space for their desires. So if there is space for the mind, why should not there be space for the intelligence? So that level of accommodation is something which is important. Now at the ethical level reasoning, that is abundantly present in scripture. Say when Arjuna says, I won't fight. Prabhupada sometimes says that in the first chapter he's saying Arjuna is so thoughtful, he's not acting impulsively. This shows how we should all be thoughtful. But in the next chapter he says that Arjuna is attached, he's crying, his tears are a sign of his ignorance. That's ethical reasoning. That Prabhupada is evaluating Arjuna's actions from an ethical perspective. So ethical is also non-literal. It's not just literal, the story happened. Who did what? How is that to be understood from an ethical parameter? So the principle of looking for non-literal themes is very much there in scripture. Without looking at non-literal themes, there will be nothing to learn for us. Now even the devotional level actually leaves us nothing to learn. Because see, at the devotional level, you could say that Prabhupada even uses this devotional level, saying Arjuna's illusion was orchestrated by Krishna so that the Bhagavad Gita could be spoken. That is true. But then if we go in that direction, then there's nothing to learn. In the sense that, okay, what made Arjuna think like that? Do we face similar situations? So there is a literal level, there's a devotional level. But in between, the devotional level is wonderful for relishing. But say for example, the gopis became proud and that's why Krishna abandoned them. Now this is not directly said in the Bhagavatam. But the lesson that is drawn is that we should not become proud. If we become proud, then Krishna will take us away from us. Now Anandana and Champu, I'm not sure if the lesson is given in the Bhagavatam or not. But the point is that is not the emphasis of the Bhagavatam, very clearly. The Bhagavatam does not stop the narrative to state that we should not become proud. But that's an important lesson that is drawn from it. Now Anandana and Champu draws completely different lesson from that. Says, why did Krishna leave? Says, actually, the gopis wanted to highlight the speciality of Radharani. And that's why they acted as if they were proud. And Radharani didn't want the gopis to be bereaved from Krishna. That's why she slowed down. And she had to slow down and stop Krishna, and Krishna left her. So it is not that Radharani became proud, rather Krishna became angry with Radharani. And because Radharani was concerned for this. So this is a completely different explanation. So now, is the explanation of pride true? Yes, it is true. In the sense that we can learn from it. That we should not become proud. But is the explanation also true? This is given by an Acharya. That the gopis are concerned for others. So my understanding is, when you come to the ethical and the non-allegorical levels, as long as these don't contradict the devotional mood or devotional theme, the siddhanta and the rasa, and especially they don't reject the literal occurrence of the pastime. Prabhupada's main concern with allegorical readings was that these were used to reject the literal. That the Kurukshetra war was considered to be a non-literal occurrence within the human body. And there was no such war that happened. That's what a famous Indian commentator said that. So that was Prabhupada's primary concern. But Prabhupada also uses allegorical quite often. Say, the 6 children in the womb of Devaki. What do they represent? That's allegorical. So now the tradition is dynamic and evolving. In my understanding, at least, the whole domain of mental health problems that we face in today's world, I'm not sure whether people face this kind of problems in the past. Surely there are problems, but the levels of depression or the levels of life from a material perspective is much tougher in the past. But how many people do we hear wanting to end their lives, actually ending their lives? We don't hear that much so much. So, upadrutaha, this agitation, this characters of Kali Yuga, and we see that happening in the sense of mental health problems. So now, if we find within scripture some reading which helps us address mental health issues, as long as it's fulfilling the purpose of scripture, I don't see it as a problem. Now, I have talked with senior devotees about it, and there's mixed opinion. But whatever I spoke about this particular pastime, I have written in a Back to God article. We have some senior Prabhupada disciples. Some of them are quite conservative. They went through it and they said that this is fair enough. They didn't. So some people may say you cannot take any such reading like this, and we respect that. But is that a standard to be applied to everyone? Sometimes in preserving the purity of the tradition, purity double quotes, we may just make the tradition irrelevant. So there is always this tension between ensuring the tradition is relevant and also ensuring that the tradition's message is preserved. So Prabhupada explains what is realization. That when he says realization, he says there is scripture. The first, we have to take the meaning of scripture, but we have to present it in a way that is interesting to the audience. That means we consider the interests of the audience. And when we consider the interests of the audience and find within scripture an intersection of the two. Like say, I have a friend from a Smartha Brahmin family, and he heard one point about when Prabhupada lecture. He says, this is a horrible aparadh, he said. Says Prabhupada was asked by a hippie that, what is the bliss of Vaikuntha like? And Prabhupada said, it's like an ocean of LSD. Prabhupada said, he said, LSD is a tamasic drug. How can you compare the bliss of Vaikuntha to LSD? No. He says, it's an offense to Vaikuntha. Which Acharya has ever compared like that? And when we say Prabhupada is our Acharya, how dare you question Prabhupada? But if that is the approach we take, then we will never be able to communicate with people who haven't taken the same faith leaps that we have taken. So the point is that yes, I don't think there's any Shastric reference to Vaikuntha being compared to ocean of LSD. LSD didn't exist in the past, so how would you compare? But the point, the theme of intoxication is there. Premonmad, Divyonmad, that principle is there. Prabhupada is taking that and presenting it in a way that is interesting to the audience. The specific metaphor might not be there, the principle is there. So that is Prabhupada's expertise. So now there are dangers in both ways. In trying to make things relatable to the audience, we might disconnect ourselves from scripture. But in trying to keep things within the ambit of scripture, we might become disconnected from the audience. So we have to find the balance. So thank you very much. श्रीमद् भगवद गीता की, श्री कृष्ण भगवान की, श्रील प्रभुपाद की, गौर भक्तवृंद की जय, निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे।
His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu ki Jai. We'll give Chaitanya Charan Prabhu a massive, massive round of applause. So we're very, very fortunate to have had Chaitanya Charan Prabhu's association. He comes to UK maybe once